All right, recording now. Okay, everyone, welcome to Buck Fim. Today's episode is brought to you by CODiii, the design and construction brain, as well as Motif. Everyone says the AECO industry is changing. New platforms, new workflows, AI everywhere, and digital transformation is in every pitch deck. But if the industry is so transformed, why do the same problems keep surviving every generation of technology? Why do billion-dollar projects still run on spreadsheets, screenshots, phone calls, and people protecting their own version of the truth? Well, today's conversation is about the friction nobody wants to admit exists. The gap between theory and execution. The point where software collides with contracts. Where coordination breaks down and where a single source of the truth becomes impossible because every stakeholder carries different risk. We get into the real blockers behind progress in construction and design, not just the bad tools, but behaviors, incentives, liability structures, and the systems that quietly resist change. We will also unpack one of the bigger questions hanging over the industry right now. Can new platforms actually replace legacy giants? Or do they eventually become trapped by the exact same realities? Later on in the episode, we'll push things even further with a live Crossfire segment that we do here on the Buck Fim podcast. It is designed to surface the things that people don't usually say until after the meeting ends. So, this is Buck Fim. Let's get into it. All right, so some people become architects, some people become inventors, and some people teach robots how to dance. Just like our guest today, who apparently looked at all three and said, yeah, I'll do that. For over 20 years, he's been on a mission to make the world a more interesting place. And honestly, he's got the resume to prove it. He's designed award-winning spaces, transformed shipping containers into adult playgrounds, built giant 3D printers for sustainable furniture, and helped construct one of the largest digitally fabricated structures in history, only to then witness it intentionally get burned to the ground. Naturally. He is the CEO of BWC Architects, co-founder of Secret Weapon Workshop, and senior product manager at Motif, where he continues pushing the boundaries of architecture, technology, fabrication, and how we bring ideas into the real world. Basically, if it involves architecture, fabrication, creativity, or doing something people say is virtually impossible, he's probably already tried it. Please put your hands together in the comfort of your living room for Jeffrey McGrew.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. Excited to be talking about kind of the latest impossible venture, so to speak. Not that it's impossible, but just, like this really big problem that we're taking on at Motif. But yeah, my background is I'm an architect who is also very much into technology and also very much an entrepreneur. So about 20-ish years ago, started my own firm using digital fabrication and architecture to do creative design build projects. Did a bunch of those projects. Along the way, also did a stint where I worked for Autodesk for a while in the office of the CTO around fabrication issues. Co-founded a furniture company that's still going, that does sustainable 3D printed furniture and a bunch of other stuff too. And then latest thing right now is, while my wife and I still run our design build architecture firm, BWC Architects, doing projects here in the Bay Area, I've joined Motif as a senior product manager to try to help build this like kind of next generation platform for BIM, because as we know, most of these tools that we use in our industry are really like, a friend of mine puts it that it's like ideas from the 70s built in the 80s and deployed like in the 90s, right? In terms of like the actual technology that most of these things are built on, right? You look at Revit, you look at ArchiCAD, you look at Tekla, you look at any of these, kind of predominant BIM platforms, and all of them pretty much were created in the late 90s, right? And most of them have ideas that go back to like the late 70s, early 80s in terms of like data structures and ideas for how you can computationally model things, right? And so a lot's changed since the late 90s, and so there's a lot of potential to try to build a new BIM platform, but it's also, as you can imagine, a really big problem, right, for a lot of reasons. So
100%.
yeah, but I'm excited to be here to talk about that and just talk about the industry in general, to be honest.
That's awesome. Well, before we get into the weeds of the process,
Mhm.
maybe dig us into a little bit more of Motif. Like what problem did it rest on that Motif came out of?
Yeah. So I'm not a co-founder at Motif, just to be
Yeah.
clear. I joined them about a year and a half ago, full time, helping out with being a product manager. It was founded by four people that all were veterans of the industry in one way or another. Two of them being, veterans from a long time at Autodesk and, in the early days of AutoCAD, and some of the foundational technology they're in, and the other two main co-founders directly from like people who worked on the Revit team, right? Like Matt Jezik, who's one of the co-founders, was the main one of the main product managers for Revit for a really long time, and then went on to make Formit and went on to make some other tools, and then left and worked for Tesla as like one of their main BIM people there before he joined Motif, or helped co-found Motif. And really, honestly, what it is Amar Hespel, who's the main CEO, you know, basically looked at the industry and wants to try to do something really big. And again, like all the technology that's in this space is old. Like there's this open letter that I'm sure you're aware of that a bunch of architects wrote to Autodesk saying, hey, you know, sorry for my French here, but fix your shit, right? Like here's a list of the things we care about that we need you to address in the primary tool, Revit, that we buy from you.
Yep.
And Autodesk's response was basically, nah, we're not gonna do that. Like we're gonna do the thing we want to do, you know? And so it's like, all right, like there's a real need out there for a more modern platform for BIM. And then when you add in things like, like you mentioned in the intro, like when you add in like, AI to the whole mix as well, there's some fundamental things that, again, are going to be very challenging to try to do on existing platforms,
Hmm.
leveraging those kinds of technologies. Like one of the things I keep coming back to with the AI thing is like, so they made an MCP for Revit that lets you tell an AI to do things to Revit, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's fine. Yeah. Um, Revit has no good way to show me what changed, right?
Hmm.
Like what changed from the last version to this version. I'm a licensed architect in California. Any drawing that I sign and stamp, I'm personally liable for, and I have to know exactly what's in that drawing set, right? Because if a
100%.
single detail changes, it could be catastrophic, right? And there's cases in history, in architecture, like in the 80s in Kansas City, where a single detail change killed like 150 people when a bridge collapsed in a hotel,
Hmm.
right? Like this is a real thing. And here we're going to turn agents loose on a drawing set. They love to change things. It's not deterministic, right? And there's no system there for me to actually be able to really see what changed and who changed it and when it touched it, all that kind of stuff. Because like one of the things I keep coming back to is I don't know if you've done any kind of like vibe coding or software development stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Just checking. Like half of what makes vibe coding work at all has nothing to do with AI. It's Git. Git is what makes vibe coding work, right?
Yeah.
Like you can
Big time.
like just the fact that you can see like, okay, what exactly changed? When did it exactly change? Who changed it? Right? Like show me the old version and the new version literally side by side, right? This really pragmatic stuff that isn't anywhere available in Revit. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be using some kind of MCP thing in Revit to edit my drawing sets anytime soon because I can't know what it changed when it didn't change, right?
Hmm.
Just really pragmatic stuff, So uh, having platforms that understand that and work better for those sorts of workflows, right? Is going to be I think a big deal in the near future. So that's a big part of it is like, you know, Revit is wonderful. It's been an amazing tool for me. I was a really early adopter of it back in
Hmm.
the days before Autodesk bought it. Started one of the first Revit users groups in America, was kind of a Johnny Appleseed on the West Coast, going from firm to firm, teaching people how to use it and stuff. And then was like Gensler's firm-wide Revit guy. This is like 20 years ago. Um, Helping Gensler roll Revit out for the first time within their company, helped do like a whole skyscraper in downtown LA with it, and then got really busy with my own firm, and that's when I left and started BWC and been kind of doing my own thing since. But you know, just saying like Revit is amazing and has been amazing, but my workflow hasn't fundamentally changed in the last like decade in
So
terms of like my day to day of what I'm actually doing with Revit, right? So,
so how
or
does
actually longer.
how does
So,
Motif specifically address that workflow issue? Because I know that
yeah,
with
it's a great
Revit,
question.
like it's very constraint driven, and you have to
Hmm.
follow that linear path. And if you want to find out what's wrong with it, you got to go through a large list of 1,000 warnings that everyone
Yeah,
ignores, and
yeah,
it's the only
yeah.
way you find out if changes have happened.
Hmm. Hmm.
Unless you upload it up into a cloud service like ACC and then try and use the highlighted versions of what's changed to be able to address it. But
Right, right.
going back to the original question there, like how does
Hmm.
Motif specifically address that?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So there's kind of four key ways that we're trying to approach, that we're trying to solve for, if you will. Um, One of those four things is what Amara likes to call high fidelity collaboration, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It is basically if you're always in the cloud and you have a proper history system, you have a proper multi-user environment that you're in, which you can see in other more modern apps, right? Like Figma and other things that work this way. Then, first off, instead of me creating an error that doesn't get resolved until like hours later because it doesn't actually resolve until I try to sync to central and realize that I'm too divergent and now there's a problem, right? Instead, you'll know like right away, right? Or you'll know very quickly. The other part of it is one of the other kind of four big tenets that we're kind of looking at this through, like the lens that we're looking at it through. Another one is what we're calling like more flexible than Revit. And so, for example, in Revit, there's a lot of instances where when faced with a conflict of some kind, your only choice is to either cancel what you were just doing. So that means you're going to lose your work, right? You have to click cancel, or you can click delete and delete the offending things that aren't resolving without a clear idea of what it is you're deleting sometimes. Because even if you do the little fly out and it shows you what the elements are, and even then you can be
Yeah.
like, well, show me a view of this, and it doesn't show you a good view, and you're like, okay, I don't know which ceiling it is that says it's going to delete because it can't resolve the ceiling for some reason, and I don't know why. And like, so now you're going to be deleting things out of your model. Those are your only two choices, right? There's no way to be like, okay, I know this is broken, but I'm going to come back to it in a moment, right? Or anything along those lines. And there's other modeling. I don't know how familiar you are with Fusion. If you've
Yep.
used Autodesk Fusion at all. So in Fusion, if I break something, it just flags it in the timeline to be like, hey, I wasn't able to resolve your 27th step, but then I resolved all the other steps after that, and I'm just going to leave the model that was that part of the model intact with the last known good version of it and let you know that step number 27 has an issue that you need to resolve, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I always get back to a state where I can continue working, and I always get back to a state where I can go and where I can obviously see that there's a problem that needs to be resolved, right?
Yep.
And so the kind of parametric change engines and stuff that we're building to be a proper legit BIM app, um, part of the strategy is to be very flexible around like, okay, if you do something that causes a conflict, don't your choice shouldn't just be cancel my work and undo, lose what I did, or delete something out of the model. It should be more fusion like, where it's like a lot more forgiving in terms of like, okay, you have a problem that you need to address, but you know, I'm going to resolve the rest of this and allow you to keep working, right? Or allow other people to keep working, which is another huge thing, right? Like if everything's in the cloud and it's collaborative and you have a truly multi-user parametric system, just because I'm doing something dumb shouldn't mean that you can't continue your work, right?
Yeah.
you
It's
know
so true.
so yeah, so there's a lot of that, and that's where one of the other big tenets that we have is we call it faster than Revit, really. And that's
Yeah.
not just in terms of like straight performance, because obviously our thing fully multi-threaded, like change propagations running multi-threaded, like it's extremely performant, and the stack that we're building on top of is very, very, very fast. So for example, I have a skyscraper that I modeled as a test model for us to use at Motif. It's a like 30-story something skyscraper modeled to a level of like just past schematic design, maybe a little bit into DD, but not very far.
Yep.
That I did in Revit. And, in Revit, it runs okay. It's a little slow, right? I mean, it's Revit. Revit's kind
Mm-hmm.
of slow. I can have like a dozen of those towers in our current uh in our current app without any and it's fine. Like it's still faster than Revit, and I have 12 of them in there. Like And
That's
I'm
pretty
not even
fantastic.
and I'm not even being smart about it. I'm not like instancing them or something. Like it's literally 12 dumb copies. You know what I mean? Like kind of thing, just to see what would happen, just to see if it would crap, if it would, if it would choke. And that's in a browser. Like it's running in a browser. So there's a lot of stuff that we're doing where it's like, okay, don't, like obvious performance improvements there, right? But then also a general idea of like, don't, you know, uh, don't make other people wait because your thing isn't resolving, right? Or like let everybody be as productive as possible the whole time,
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
and just like tracking decisions and like just making sure that that gets fed into the process. A lot of the
Yeah.
time, it's such a disjointed and separated workflow, and these are things that we get asked for because it was part of my line of work. We have to ask questions, and it's
Yeah.
always about maximizing learning. We are always digging into the hard truths,
Yeah.
and that kind of digs into the next topic. I mean,
Mhm.
I could sit here all day and listen about Motif because I'm huge about new technology. I absolutely love hearing about it. We got big platforms out there like Conic and Motif like, that are
Yeah.
doing the big things with models that are
Mhm.
really pushing the boundaries. And that's why this season of Buck Fim's all about is about breaking the norm because the process
Mhm.
hasn't been working. It's
Yeah.
been regressing, and we want to identify what those problems are and add some progression to that mix.
Mhm.
So let's get into the core friction here. Where does work hit reality and actively resist the change Motif is trying to implement? Like, is the problem that everyone protects their own truth for contract reasons, making a single source of the truth impossible? Like,
Yeah. So that's a really good point because we're actually architecting our system in a way where, with the design application that we're hoping to have out in uh, soon for people to start seeing and playing with. Because right now we have an app out now. Motif has an app out now that's a collaboration product, right?
mm-hmm,
Where you can publish Revit and Rhino models to it. You can drag in GLBs, and it's a very messy environment, right? Where everybody can just kind of lay things out in a Figma like sort of way, right? Like everybody can have different things in different places, and it's very messy, kind of on purpose, right? Because on the
yeah,
early phase of a project where it's collaborative, you're not worried about single sources of truth yet, or sources of truth, I should say, not
mm-hmm,
single source of truth. Um, and we were fully embracing the fact that this dream of BIM being a single source of truth isn't really the way things work, right? Like to your point, right? There's multiple sources of truths, right? Different people have different things for contractual reasons, but also for other reasons. It's really common, like in our design build architecture firm, our current workflow is where a lot of stuff gets modeled in Revit, and some things that for fabrication can't be modeled in Revit, or it's faster to model them in something else, get modeled in Fusion,
mm,
right? But then we need a placeholder for them in Revit because that is a thing that's going into the building and we need to manage it, right? So it's like, okay, the source of truth for what's inside of that placeholder isn't in Revit, it's in Fusion, right? Like if you need to look up something specific about that model, it's going to be in Fusion, it's not going to be in Revit. But we need enough of a truth in Revit as an interface between the more complex fabricated thing and the rest of our traditional construction or permit set or whatever it is, to be able to maintain the drawing set and the coordination therein for actual production, right?
yeah,
Um,
and that
yeah.
really gets
So
weighed down because the one thing that the owners of the world, the developers need to do is to adapt to procurement changes and pricing models. And usually, like in many of the projects that we worked on in the past, they'll say
mhm,
model out all the way to construction drawings a building that's temporary or tentative
yeah,
so that we can change it later. And they expect a button to be pushed to have it completed the
yeah.
next week. And reality is you're in a constraint driven program, and that
Mhm,
change is not as easy as swapping out a window wall manufacturer.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so we're trying to do some things that there's some stuff I have to be a little vague here on purpose
of
just
course.
because of,
Yeah.
but there are some things that we're doing that are describing a building in a fundamentally different way than Revit or ArchiCAD
Mm-hmm.
does. using a different kind of data model that is going to be more flexible than traditional like IFC based, Revit based kind of ideas behind BIM. Like for example, in an IFC model or a Revit model, and when I say model, I mean like data model. I mean
Yeah.
like the schema, right? Idea that something can only be one thing, right? Like it's a ramp or it's a floor or it's a roof.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, it can't be all three of those things, right? But when I'm designing like a parking garage, I could absolutely have something that's all three of those things, right?
Yep. 100%.
And the current systems have like no way to parse something like that, right? Or like talking to a big architecture firm who's one of our partners that we're working with at Motif, they want to have where the door panel, the door frame, and the door hardware are three separate things that you can tag with three different tags and have show up on three different schedules, right? And in Revit, there's no way to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to do some weird workaround where the door frame is actually a window family that you embedded into the door family, and then you can tag it as a separate thing, and it's like a shared family, and you have to do like weird workarounds, because again, the door can only be a door, and it has no concept in its like very object-oriented, rigid model that you might want a door to be made up, composed of more things, right? So we're doing a lot of work on this like kind of idea of compositional design, if you will, um, where you can build up a thing. Like here's another great example is like 2 3 years ago, about 3 years ago, I got hired to just do some content creation for a lighting design company that was like a friend of a friend, right? And they're like, we have this line of light fixtures, we want nice Revit content of them so that designers can download them and specify them and put them in their project, right? And it was
Sure.
like a nice little Revit side job. I was like, oh, I'll just do this as a little side thing, a little extra money, model up some Revit families. I can model Revit families really quickly. I'll just do this real fast. And as you get deeper into it, you're like, okay, there is no way that I can actually represent their product the way they want it represented,
Mm-hmm.
because in reality, a light fixture is a skew of 6 to 10 options. You have this length, this lens, this shade, this color, this hanging hardware, you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
And it's a combinational thing, right, that you wind up with. But because Revit's like, nope, one file, one family with types in it, it's like, well, okay, either I have like for this one light fixture that's a single product of theirs, I'm going to have a dozen different Revit families, because you can't actually have some computational configurational sort of thing, or you have a single Revit family with like a million weird instance parameters buried in it with like if then statements and stuff, right?
Yeah. And the
It's
harsh
dumb.
reality of that
Yeah,
is the product's going to be discontinued next year. So then you're back at square one doing the
yeah,
next one.
yeah, yeah. So we're very aware of some of these warts because of the fact that we have some real heavy hitters in our team that were deeply involved in Revit's creation and saw a lot of the promise and then failure, right, of
Mm-hmm.
this big idea that Revit had. We're kind of like, there are some things where we're like, okay, we really do know where the bodies are buried and we know what we're going to try to do differently about it.
Yeah.
And this is what, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the bigger things, is this idea of like, how can you make things more compositional? Like I haven't worked directly with it, because it's kind of like well outside of my range. Our projects are not like, my design build firm's projects are not fancy and super expensive. I mean, we were able to do a lot of really creative stuff, so it looks really cool. A lot of that is enabled by using the digital technology that we do with digital fabrication and BIM and things to be able to
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of work with less overhead, if you will, right? So that there's more budget left over to do more interesting creative things. But I have friends that work with CODiii,
Yep.
doing like facade work. It's kind of the classic thing that people use CODiii for. And apparently CODiii has like some power copy framework thing that lets you make frameworks of complex assemblies, right? So that you can have parametric assemblies of things rationalize themselves out for you in some really smart way, right? So you really can have like, I have this noodly surface and I want to walk that noodly surface and panelize it, and then I want to go through and make the panels real, and I want to make the seams real, and I want to figure out the structural, and I want to figure out the connectors and like all that kind of stuff, and do it in a way where you could change it and have it parametrically change that whole assembly, right?
Yep.
Something that you could do inside of Revit using an API, right? Like if you wrote like hard-coded software in Revit to do those sorts of things. So we're also looking at that kind of idea where it's like, well, okay, how could you make like cascading parametric systems so that you really could not only do this like light fixture thing I was talking about, but also do like some kind of more sane way of handling like multifamily housing,
Mm-hmm.
where you have different unit plans and you want to mix and match unit plans, but still have things resolve in some way. Because like your developer example, like a long time ago, I worked for a firm in San Francisco that just did multifamily housing. And yeah, the developers have a pro forma that's a spreadsheet where they want to have a certain unit mix, right? And they might come back to you and be like, oh, we want to swap like 8 of the 2-bedroom units for 12 1-bedroom units because
Always.
that's gonna make the project pencil out, right? And you're like scrambling because you're like, oh crap, like we got to just kind of start over maybe with the Revit model in some areas, right? Unless you planned really carefully from the beginning to be able to make those kinds of changes. And so
Yeah.
we're this is where that whole like more flexible than Revit thing comes into play, is trying to build a parametric system that is still BIM, right? It still understands what a building is. You can still make a drawing set, right? Like it's still very pragmatic, but the way you're combining these things together and the way you're able to use the parametric elements that it has would enable you to have more flexibility, right?
100%. And
Yeah.
it is being so like we've been discussing this with a number of different firms of how they could foresee this happening because
Mm-hmm.
the it's interesting when you put on the different hats and look at it from their perspective and how they maintain profitability depending on which hat they're wearing. And when they say, a perfect world, where all the collaboration works and exists, well, a lot of the profitability acts in being able to to bend and twist according to the project's needs. And it the hardest part is when you actually need to make that change. And we looked at making wall and floor connection systems that when you click them together, the details form themselves, because we've learned that the details, and this is controversial in itself, shouldn't actually be done by architects. It should be done by the manufacturers. And it's again an unpopular opinion, because the manufacturers are the one that actually had to take the product through testing to make sure that it's actually liable from a life safety perspective. And those combinations of items have natural hook points, and those natural hook points can be used to generate details.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an idea in nature, but it is ultimately up to the whole composition from a building science perspective for an architect to make sure that that is
Right.
where it goes. So
Right. Well, and also in that detail front, this is one area that I'm kind of very vocal about, is that there's still a lot of stuff in a BIM project that isn't going to be fully 3D modeled.
mm-hmm.
Like there's things that are just going to live in a 2D, if you will, drawing that is like, because you brought up like building science, like, how your vapor barrier and flashing is around your windows, right?
Yeah.
Like you're actually going to model all of that shit down to like every fold. It's like you could do that. It's very challenging, right? Like, even really good tools that are good at doing like folded sheet metal with proper K values and all that kind of stuff, like Fusion does. It's still challenging to model all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a performant way. And modeling really thin stuff that wraps around other things is a nightmare scenario for any kind of BREP solid modeler, which most BIM things are built on top of, right? Like you run into a lot of really hairy problems really fast if you're like, oh yeah, we're going to literally model everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it shows up in your idealized thing, right? There are some things where you really just want to have a big fat dashed line drawn over the top of it and a note that says, go read the spec.
Spec?
Yeah, go read the spec, or go read the manufacturer's recommended way of doing this waterproofing install, because otherwise it's not going to work, it's going to fail, and you won't have a warranty, and it's going to be a big problem. And so I totally hear what you're saying there. And the fact that with my architecture firm that we do design build, there are a lot of times where we're actually deeply involved in the construction of the actual project, not just in the traditional like helping be a project manager or doing construction administration sort of stuff, which we do, but also just like where we are actually physically delivering parts of the project ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even in that idealized scenario where we're, if you will, vertically integrated, where we're literally modeling and fabricating the thing and delivering it, it probably only reduces the amount of drawings that we have to actually make by about 20-30%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we still have to make a lot of drawings, right? Even in instances where this install is like something for like a trade show, or it's something for like just an interior furniture piece, and it's not even going to have like permit drawings, right?
Hmm.
There's no approval that really is needed. It's like some freestanding idealized art piece thing. Even then, right, we're still having to make lots of drawings. So I don't think that, because I get people asking me sometimes where they're like, do you ever think drawings are going to go away, or drawings are going to become like some kind of fully automated thing, right? That the architect doesn't have to do, right? You model and then the drawings just kind of make themselves. And I'm like, I don't think that's ever a reality. I don't think that's ever going to happen. You
Yeah.
know?
So I've been building that exact thing behind the scenes for myself. More so, it was interesting. We were trying to look at the time it took for a modular building to be or designed, and
Mm-hmm.
the weight of the time was designing every individual panel and dimensioning every stud and doing like everything.
Yeah.
So we looked at it from a different lens and said, okay, well, what if we just removed the actual workflow for dimensioning and tagging completely, and then had it from the perspective of every hat you wear on? So you come in as a window wall manufacturer, you say, dimension according to us. If you present the information in the way that the hat is being worn, and if you want to just go to a 3D view, hover and click on hold on a stud, it'll show you the dimension relative to the constraint
Yeah.
dimensions that are there. And that
Yeah.
was the mentality, to eradicate that massive time suck that is part of
Yeah.
our project.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
yeah.
it totally makes sense. No, it totally makes sense, because detailing is funny. Detailing means different things depending on which hat you're wearing, right? Like architects think of detailing as like literally drawing 2D drawings
Mm-hmm.
in like AutoCAD or in like Revit detail views or something like that. Where you talk to somebody in steel fabrication, like structural steel fabrication, right?
Yeah.
Detailing is a totally different thing for them, right?
100%.
Yeah, right. So it's like even the vocabulary isn't shared sometimes between these different groups, and so it can be very challenging, right? So yeah, the idealized dream that everything is going to be in one single BIM model that Autodesk will own and will be on their ACC cloud is just, I just don't see that really working. In
Yeah,
the
all the big shops are in
personally.
a big panic right now because, well, I mean, they're having to retool, and this is part of the transformational change. Vibe coding obviously had a big part of it, and
Yeah.
being able to, the people with had the big ideas to problems that were always there but couldn't figure out a pathway to do it are now solving them very quickly.
Hmm.
And that's why I'm super excited to have somebody like yourself and the team at Motif jumping on the call, because these are the paved pathways that we're sending shoots off of now, and taking new routes.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
guess like the next area I wanted to jump into here
Yeah.
was guilty services.
Hmm.
I am always been one to take the rough road, just because we had to work with constraint driven software. I've been
Hmm.
using AutoCAD since I was 8 years old, and I taught it in the local university when I was 15. And
Cool.
when we got into Revit, I exhausted everything in it. Eventually taught myself Dynamo and ended up teaching across North
Hmm.
America and helping out firms to figure out how they can automate and bend it to its will. Like
Yeah.
using I don't know, like curtain wall to do precast panel facades, or like
Yeah.
things, just breaking it and using things for what they shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of that, do you have any essential manual workarounds that you utilize that that survives every software upgrade?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two really. One is that like, okay, so this was a long time ago, so I'm kind of dating myself, but this was like probably, I want to say about 15 years ago, uh, roughly about 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. All right, my wife and I are at Autodesk University,
Hmm.
and there's somebody from Autodesk up at the stage talking. So this would have been probably like more like 15 years ago, talking about how you can't do any kind of digital fabrication out of Revit because Revit's not accurate enough,
Hmm.
and won't won't work. You have to use Inventor instead. And my wife, I wasn't in that class, but my wife was, and she raises her hand and she's like, that's the only thing we've been doing for like the last, at that point, 6 to 8 years, I think, or something like that, is exporting things out of Revit. We don't even own Inventor, and we fabricate all the time, right? Like, um, and so the reality is, because Revit's a solid modeler under the hood, you can export out SAT files. Now you can actually export out step files too, but you can also just cut sections through things and export dumb vectors. And the dumb vectors are accurate enough that you can totally use them. Like, they're super accurate. I mean, the issue is you can't model something smaller than that, right? But like, you can't sorry, I was making a hand gesture. It's a podcast. You can't model something too small. And Revit has like a limit on how tiny something can be.
Correct. Yeah.
But if it's just above that in terms of length, it's accurate to 10 decimal places, right? And wood, your CNC out wood relaxes way more than that post cut. Anyway, like, there's tolerances in the materials and all this other stuff. So long story short, the thing that survived for us is there's certain things that we're making that are really simple, like cabinets is a good example, right? Like, really simple cabinets where it's like, okay, I don't need to model this in Fusion. I actually just have some really nice parametric families that I made literally like almost 15 years ago now in Revit, that just basically, you configure your little cabinet or your bookshelf or whatever. And in the family, it has section views where it's able to export out those faces. And we have a little API tool that I wrote forever ago that makes these little section views, and it just exports out dumb flat vectors, which are really easy to get out of Revit. And some of the CAM tools that we utilize for doing CNC fabrication, there's one that's a pretty affordable off-the-shelf tool that's meant for like cabinet makers and sign makers and stuff. It's made by a company called Vectrix out of England. We use Aspire, but they make a even cheaper version called VCarve Pro. That's like, it's the CAM software that comes with your CNC machine if you buy like an entry-level Shapeoko or something like that. Like, I'm talking about, this is like cheap, easy, straightforward stuff. And it's just dumb vectors.
Yep.
And we export them out as a DXF and pull them into the, VCarve Pro, which is like a cheesy 2.5D CAM software, like with a little layout vector editing tool set in it. And you're just able to very quickly lay out all your parts for your cabinets and just like set up like, oh, I want these vectors to be this depth, I want these vectors to be this other depth, and whatever, and then just crank out a bunch of parts that totally fit together perfectly because they're all coming from a solid model. But we're not exporting out an SAT or a step file even. We're not running it through Fusion. We're not doing more complex CAM or anything. It's just dirty and dumb and really straightforward, and it's a very fast, performant way to make stuff out of Revit, to be honest.
That's pretty awesome.
It's just that the as long as your shapes aren't too complex, right? Because like, when you get into like complex joinery, obviously you can model it in Revit, but it becomes more and more of a drag. Whereas in a tool like Fusion, it's just way easier to do that kind of thing. And so again, there's kind of a balancing point where we're like, okay, depending on how complex things get, we'll then kick out and do that modeling in Fusion instead, maybe, and have a placeholder inside of Revit. But you'd be surprised how much of the stuff that you see on our website was just purely Revit alone in terms of the modeling, because there's just a lot of stuff that you can do where you don't have to fully model something. Like, here's a prime example with this kind of vector export workflow. You can even just have two things overlapping in the model. In the family, you don't even need to have like a Boolean subtract, because when you cut a section view through it, you'll get the vectors of the intersection.
Yep.
Right. And that's enough to then, when it gets into the CAM software, to be like, these vectors, that's a pocket that I want you to carve to put the tab into.
Makes sense.
So you don't actually have to like subtract the tab from the sidewall in the solid modeling software and then export out the sidewall as its own separate solid family. Right?
Yeah.
Which is what you do in like Fusion, right? So it's like, okay, like, it's simpler, but it's faster. And if you're doing something simple, it can be really fast. So that's kind of our dirty, one of our dirty like things that we just still do. We're making some custom door. We're doing a big house remodel. We're making some custom doors for our house. Literally, just a couple days ago, Jillian took a elevation shot from our Revit model, exported it out as dumb DXFs, pulled it into this little vector editing CAM software, and it's like, here's the custom door that we can make.
Amazing. Yeah. I took, one one of the things that I've actually been really into lately is that free app that you can get on your phone from Unreal Engine, Reality Scan.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I use it all the time to do
yeah,
as-built scans. It's
yeah.
surprisingly accurate.
I use Polycam,
Hmm.
which is it's cheap but paid, but it's the exact same idea where it's just using the built-in fancy lidar on a modern smartphone and lets you do scans. And yeah, nothing's super accurate, but it's great when I get back to my desk and I realize I didn't get a picture of that part of the ceiling. And and all I want to know is is there a sprinkler head over there? Is there like, and where it roughly is so I can stay away from it, because I can't get within 2 feet of it anyway. So it's fine. Like, I don't need to have it millimeter accurate. I just need to see a blob in the point cloud that says, oh yeah, there it is. Okay. Like, I'll
Yeah,
just stay like, 18-inch clearance is the code. So I'll just stay 24 inches away from it and that'll be fine. Right.
and I
Like,
mean,
yeah. So I
there's
use that a lot. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And there's some things that, that we've been asking for in the software that we have. Never mind software, just the operating systems themselves
Mm-hmm.
within, like within Windows. We've had file renaming as part of our requirement ever since Windows has been in existence. But changing multiple file names with specific naming conventions has
Mm-hmm.
just not been there. And yet there's a free tool online, that bulk rename utility, that
Mm-hmm.
has been up there for ages, that has done that job so eloquently, and yet it still has not been brought in. Like, it's a fundamental item. So I use that all the time as a cheat sheet for me to get past the
Yeah.
mass amounts of sheet updates and things like that.
Oh,
But
cool. Cool,
but
cool.
yeah, so I mean, there's always that battle of theory versus execution, and
Mhm.
where does tech overpromise and where does digital ultimately become? Someone still has to fix this by hand.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one of the things I keep coming back to is when I think about the kind of very early days of BIM, when I first started using Revit, what I was actually excited about was that it was going to help, that it was a faster and easier way for me to make drawing sets than AutoCAD. Because at the time I was using like AutoCAD, it would have been like AutoCAD 2000 probably, or
Mm-hmm.
2001. Um, and even just like putting together a simple, because at that time I was like a job captain, like putting together permit sets and things at an architecture firm in San Francisco. And even just simple things like, oh, I'm setting up an elevation sheet with a bunch of interior elevations for something, was arduous, right? Because it was all manual, you know and you're like drafting, pushing lines around on the screen. And you could be clever in how you set up your XRFs. You could be, this is early days, right? You could be clever how you set up your XRFs, but at that time there weren't even parametric blocks yet inside of AutoCAD. There was no like view tags or anything. Like, it was all manual, right?
Yeah.
And you had to draw all that stuff. And so when I first started using Revit, what I was more excited about was that I could put together a drawing set a whole lot faster, right? And that I could trust that like my elevation tags would point to the right elevation on the right sheet, right? A number didn't change somewhere and screw up my drawing set, because that was something that was like hardwired into Revit, that the elevation tag is always going to point at the right elevation, right? Like something so simple as that. And then later all these people came along and you're like, oh, BIM is like a concept, it's not a tool. And BIM, the I in BIM, and like all this kind of stuff about BIM. And I was kind of like, man, I was just trying to make faster, better drawings, like, and like understand the project better, right? It wasn't like this like grand theory of BIM and central source of truth. So and then everybody kind of went crazy for BIM for a while, and talked it up about, like, had these like ever kind of irrational ideas for like what was going to be possible, right? And then in the meantime, I go and start my own little firm, and I'm just working in Revit in the way that I feel like Revit was probably intended to be used, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
doing fairly detailed 3D models, fair amount of drafting in the last mile when it comes to like some of the stuff I was talking about, with like waterproofing and this sort of stuff and things like that. And then our firm grows and we start doing projects with larger architecture firms that are also using Revit, because we were really early adopters and the industry kind of catches up to us. And now it's like, oh, cool. Like, now we're helping out. We got brought in to do this like fancy ceiling in a office space where a different architect was doing the office space, and the client brought us in just to do the fancy ceiling, right? And I'm like, oh, great. We finally get to work with an architect that's using Revit. We'll be able to share models. We'll have this idealized idea that everybody's been talking about with BIM. they send us their model and it's garbage. Like it's unusable, right? It's like not even like most, they were using Revit in a like 2.5D as a 2.5D drafting program. Like they were
Yeah.
using Revit like you would use the, I don't know if you ever used architectural desktop or ACA.
Soft plan. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like they were using it like that. So there was like literally just like model lines drawn places and
Yeah.
stuff. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh man, oh this is like this is real. I was like, what happened? I thought this was going to be like this bright BIM future, and it's totally not. Totally not.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think in terms of the overpromising, I don't know if it's so much that the tech overpromises. I think there's this really great saying that so when I first got into using Linux a long time ago, I have some friends that are like senior sysadmin Unix type people, right? You know, work for like big tech companies and things like
Hmm.
that. And when I first got into Linux, one of them sent me this PDF, and there's this famous book that's called the Unix Haters Handbook, where it was written in the 80s, and it was written by the people who made Unix. Like some of the people who wrote this book are literally the people who made Unix. And the premise of the book is like, okay, you can hate Unix, but hate it for the right reasons, because here's where the bodies are buried, because either these are the specific things we had to do that we know were great, but we had to do them to make this work, right?
Yeah.
And there's this amazing quote at the beginning of the book where one of the people who made Unix says, and I believe this is kind of true of a lot of technology. It says, "Those who fail to understand Unix are doomed to reinvent it poorly." And I'm like, oh my god, like there's a lot of things in technology where it's like if you don't actually understand the technology, you're doomed to like reinvent it badly because you didn't understand what it was actually doing, right? And so I feel like with BIM, the whole idea got so overblown in terms of like what was going to be possible and what BIM was, and all these arguments about what BIM is online and everything like that. When I mean, originally it's like, oh no, it's just a better way to like help coordinate a project and make a drawing set. Really,
Yeah.
you know,
And
really is what it goes down to.
that was something like, and I always took guff for this, but I actually enjoyed the stair tool in Revit. I thought because I understood who it was designed from. The stair manufacturers had very specific guidelines of how to make the railing perfect and how to make everything line up. So
Mm-hmm.
if you designed the stair the intended way it was supposed to work, it worked really well.
Mm-hmm.
But with codes being stringent and things getting tightened and goosenecks coming in and things going like that,
Yeah, yeah,
all fell apart. But if you had that empathy and understood how it was actually being compiled, it was actually a pretty slick tool.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the
totally.
but yeah, so I mean, Motif's taking on big giants. You had a lot of big investment come into place. The
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and I have read the articles. I'm sure a few of our listeners have as well. That
Mm-hmm.
Motif is being dubbed the Revit Autodesk killer. Um,
Well,
have we
I don't
still
know if
got
we're
the
not.
Dukes up on that one?
Oh yeah, I mean, to be bluntly honest, it's not that Motif is an Autodesk killer, because Autodesk is a huge company doing a lot of different things,
Yeah.
right? Um, and some of those things, like Fusion, are fantastic, right? Some of those things, like some of the more recent offerings, are just kind of like, this is kind of a spicy take, but like a lot of the stuff that's come out recently from Autodesk in general are like, honestly, just kind of mediocre web apps,
Hmm.
right, that are hard to get super excited about, right? Like they talk up at AU, they're like, oh, here's our new thing, here's our new docs, here's BIM docs, here's docs, you should be using
Forma.
docs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, or Forma, you should be using Forma. And I'm like, Forma is just like space, what was it called, Space Maker,
Yeah.
that like
Space
that
Maker.
that yeah, Space Maker, that got rebranded and added onto. And yeah, more stuff's been added onto it, right? And there's more going on there. That's kind of an unfair take on Forma, but I'm like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, some of these things that you have in here are just kind of like, okay, web apps. It's not really anything super exciting for me, in terms of my workflow. And so we're not taking on all of Autodesk, and we're not even really taking on Revit directly in the way that you think. It's not like
Hmm.
we're making like a straight up replacement for Revit,
Of
but
course.
we kind of are, right? So
Hmm.
the idea is that like we're making a proper BIM tool that you can use to get your job done, that some people, like, probably pretty soon could use instead of Revit to do their job, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Um, but we understand like we're going to be living alongside of Revit for a very long time, you
Yeah,
know.
it's not going
Uh,
anywhere.
well, and also, I have friends that work on like hospital projects where the project is like a 9-year project, right?
Hmm.
You're not going to switch CAD packages in the middle of it. Like that's insane, right? It could even be that you're contractually obligated to deliver things in certain formats, right?
Hmm.
So like you're not going to like move that project off of Revit for, another BIM platform, even if that BIM platform was like phenomenal and that much faster, right? Like there's too much risk in that
Hmm.
switch, right? And so, yeah, so we are very much taking on Revit directly. But at the same time, it's not like we're trying to just make Revit that runs in a browser, right?
Yeah,
Like if you look at Onshape, which is amazing, Onshape is brilliant. I don't know, have you used Onshape at
I
all?
haven't.
Okay, so Onshape is really good, is phenomenal technology, and there's a few things that Onshape did that are just absolutely brilliant. Like nobody else in the CAD industry has pulled them off. But basically, Onshape is SolidWorks but in a browser, and it was literally made by the SolidWorks people. Some of the core people of SolidWorks went and made SolidWorks, but it runs in a browser, right? As a multi-user experience, as all the kind of similar stuff is what we're doing, right? And so we look at that and we're like, okay, Onshape is phenomenal, and some of the choices that they put into it are phenomenal, but it didn't really change how people were working because it's exactly like SolidWorks. It's just in a browser now, right? And so we're like, okay, it didn't really like take over the industry. SolidWorks is still the industry standard, um, because it one of the theories is that it just didn't offer enough of a change in value, right? Because it just was the same thing but in a browser, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to be very aware of like we're not just reinventing Revit and putting it in a browser. We're
Hmm.
trying to make a what would be conceived of as a modern BIM platform, right? Which has a lot of other hooks, so to speak, into it, in terms of API, in terms of using AI agents to do things and other stuff, that are going to be very different than what you see inside of Revit. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, yes, we are very much aiming for that some subset of the construction industry will be able to do their job using our tool instead of Revit. That's 100% something that we're aiming for. But it's not going to be like literally a Revit replacement.
Hmm.
Um, it just in the fact that like you might do that job in a different way. We're hoping a better way, right?
Yeah.
Than how you would do that in Revit. And that, there's certain things that we're not going to be like directly copying from that world, right?
Yeah.
Is
I
the
mean, when you're
so
paving new routes, it's you have to break it down to the foundation and rebuild it again.
mhm.
And when you already have an ecosystem built on that train,
Yeah.
it's hard, and it's to adapt to that change. Even when those letters came out, I can feel the handcuffed like feeling that you're as a software developer being like, how do we even provide this? Like something as simple as they want usability in the line tool. Well, everything in Revit is a line tool, the whole thing, inside and out. So when they're like, give me a trim all command, and you're like, I've got to do that for every source code inside the entire software. So I mean, like, and that's what you got to hunker down and look at.
Yeah.
But the process is changing, things are altering. You see companies now like SharePoint thought they were invincible for the longest period of time,
Mhm.
but now there's Ignite, and Ignite's coming out and jumping into the hands of a large number of firms out there
Mhm.
because they're giving them what they're asking for.
Yep.
And so, I mean, ultimately, right now, what's happening is a big gravitational shift because, yes, to the point of that letter that came out, I think our company at the time was one of the individuals that didn't get on the letter, but was definitely one of them. We had a
Mhm.
project shut down on ACC, and we had 16 different consultant groups that were just stopped working that day for 8 hours to 12 hours.
Yep.
And we had nobody to pin it to. And it was and then we did, and it ultimately came out that way. But that's just
Yep.
what happens. Like there's accountability measures that need to be in place,
Yep.
but that's all part of change. And
Mhm.
it's really cool to see you guys taking that hot take and jumping into the stream to
Yeah.
do it.
No, we're swinging for the fences. Like it's a very ambitious thing to do, right? But again, just wanted to say that like we see us living alongside of Revit, and yes, replacing some Revit seats along the way. But, you know, honestly, like one of the first things we did was make a really awesome plugin that you can run in Revit or Rhino that lets you just publish your model into
Yep.
our environment, and it comes through with all the data. It comes through with the structure that you want.
Mhm.
It even comes through in the new design app. If you have like complex models where you have like linked models, which is really common on like larger projects, right? You know, like you have a skyscraper and you have like 8 different teams working on different parts of the project. And I don't mean like, I mean, like, you know, you have the structural team, you have an interiors team, you have a core shell team, you have a facade team, you've got, you know what I mean? And each of them has their own model, and then you're linking them together in some complex way to kind of build the tower in
Yep.
Revit. Like, we respect all of that. So
Oh
if you
yeah,
publish,
100%.
so if you publish that into our environment, you get the same framework because those are the way the teams want to work, right? You know what I mean? Like, so we maintain that as opposed to like dumping everybody into just one big BIM bucket, right?
Yeah.
And then also we've been talking a lot about like really pragmatic realities around that, where it's like, okay, you're the structural engineer, I'm the architect, we're sharing models, but you don't want to show me your work until you're ready for me to see it because you don't want me reacting to information too soon, right?
That's
Um,
true.
you know, and so a lot of the current models that you see with some other kind of BIM 2.0 platforms that are out there right now just aren't, I feel like, taking some of those ideas into account, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
We're
know,
seeing that a
and
lot.
so yeah, and so there's just some really pragmatic reality stuff that I think is important to consider when it comes to this kind of stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, because there is definitely a data shift. Like every
Mhm.
data is becoming a big central part. Even ourselves over at Oculi here, we've taken a step back and studied it from the ground roots all the way
Mhm.
to like we've been interviewing suppliers and window washers and everyone from every point of the industry that touches a project in any way or form, and that's how we've been building this database of information to help inform design so that when an architect's working on a heritage project, um, they're the owner decides, hey, I want to switch a brick material on the outside. I really just have to ask the heritage consultant if it's okay, and they say it's okay, and they go ahead and make their decision based on that one loosely laid piece of information, not
Mhm.
knowing that
Mhm.
there's urban design guidelines, cost restrictions, maintenance
Yeah.
things like. So that we've been looking at that history of decision making and seeing
Mhm.
how we can make
Mhm.
informed decisions, and that's
Oh,
we're
that's great. Yeah.
yeah, we've been digging into that area more heavily because we still believe that the architects they need to spend their time working on what really matters, and that's the form and function of the building, and less of
Mhm.
the time doing the heavy monotonous research. So
Yeah.
and then helping the owners make decisions that are really informed. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Oh, super cool.
Yeah. So, this leads me into the next part. This is a new segment this season. We call it the Crossfire. The Crossfire is where we bring somebody from a different part of the industry to answer questions that are usually held behind or outside of the meeting room, and things that are, an unpopular opinion or questions that just tend to not drive too much in the industry. We're trying to create a collaborative atmosphere and break down some walls. And the intention here is to really bring the issues to the surface so that we can start talking about them collectively. And I think what we'll do is we'll jump into this in a minute here and see where we go. All right, everybody, here we go. It's CODii's Crossfire time. This time we're looking into some really fun topics in terms of the hard things that we need to discuss. And today, in our CODii's Crossfire guest, we have Jillian on the call alongside Jeffrey. Say hello, everyone, Jillian.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
And just to be clear, everyone is either at their desk or driving to a very monotonous 2.5 hour commute in their morning drive. So, um, all right. So these questions range in all different aspects, but I have a few that may tickle that architectural mind in terms of what we would typically see on site. So where do you think architects consistently overestimate material behavior in ways that quietly create structural compromises later? That's an interesting question.
I mean, I mean, there's been times on jobs where definitely feel like engineering has overbuilt things, overspec'd things,
Oh
and
yeah. Oh, yeah.
required so much more work and labor to the job than seemed really necessary. I mean, that's definitely happened. Um, in terms of architects doing it, I mean, I don't actually work with a lot of architects because we run our own architecture firm. So what I do work with is I work with a lot of engineers and I work with a lot of GCs and GC, when you're working with contractors, the one pain point that we come into time and time again is them not wanting to do anything that's kind of outside of the box, which is really where we specialize. So it makes sense that we run into it a lot because that is, why people hire us is because we do these more bespoke things. And but when we're working with GCs to try to realize it, I get a lot of not they don't have a lot of interest, and I get it because they need to make money and they can't spend extra time and it's hard for them to quote and but I wish that they were a little bit more collaborative and a little more networky and had a larger network of tradespeople to pull on.
Well, I thought that example there was a story Jillian told the other day where she was talking to a cabinet maker about a somewhat complex cabinet. It wasn't anything super crazy, but it was a somewhat complex cabinet that, wanted to get done for a project. And it's an older cabinet maker who has a CNC machine, but doesn't really understand how it works, and has two sons that are working for him that are young. And the sons hear Jillian talking about, like, no, you could do this and you could do this and you could do
Well,
this.
no, I said,
yeah, go ahead.
I said, uh, I was asking them about their process because I was interested to know if I could share straight DXFs with them, or if I could share a 3D model with them because they had some imagery that made me think that they had the ability to do something like that. And then it turned out that they did have a CNC machine, and I was like, oh great, you have a CNC machine, like you can take like straight DXFs. Are you taking this model that you made and kicking it out straight to the DXFs? And there was a moment where the older man who had run the company forever was like, no, that's not how we do it. We do it this other way. And the two sons were like nodding their heads, being like, yes, this is how we need to do it. We need to model and then kick it straight to the CNC. And I was like, yeah, and if you did that, like I could just share my, files with you, and I could give you files that you could use. And, but there was an unwillingness to do it on his part, but also part of me saw the future, which I was like, okay, it's not that far away to where the sons are taking over, and this is the way. So I look forward to that for sure.
Is there so this is kind of for both of you. Is there something that ever happens on site that never makes it back to you routinely, that just gets done their way on site? Like something that you routinely see on any given project. I know that for one thing, it's like the way that cornices are done out on site and the way they dress them out is just from what materials they have, and they make the decision on site. And an architectural feature, which you spent a lot of time on, just gets blasted into something completely different. So is there something that never makes it back to your desk, but you always see it done their way on site?
We work really closely with most of the contractors, because one of the things that kind of ties into your first question that we try to avoid a lot is there can be a lot of waste in the construction industry just because the different parties are taking each other very literally, right? Like I draw a plan and the structural engineer sees the plan and they're like, well, guess they wanted that wall there. Even if they move the wall a foot over to the left, it would be a lot cheaper, but that's where the wall is. So I'm going to design a moment frame to support the fact that the wall's there, right? And, we try really hard to have a lot of conversations up front with the engineers and directly with the contractors to be like, hey, we're thinking this, but what do you think is a better, cheaper, faster way to possibly do this, right? And, when they come back and they want to do something dumb, we have an opportunity to then be in that conversation, right? And to be able to say, hey, like, here's a way we could do this that would be better, smarter, faster, whatever, and not have to worry so much about something happening without our involvement, I guess is a good way to put it, because we tend to be a lot more involved. But that's possible because our projects are a lot smaller and we're doing a lot of design build stuff, right? On much, much larger projects, I do know exactly what you're talking about. And honestly, most of the time, I don't know, there's something that it was in an interview with Frank Gehry's office. Not that I'm comparing us to Frank Gehry by any means, right? Like we're not, famous or anything, but they talked about how there's certain things that architects get really obsessed about and that they gave up the control over to be able to do the fancy thing, right? So like Frank Gehry's office is like, we're doing the crazy curtain wall, the crazy facade, the crazy organic part of the building. We're not going to obsess about like where the light fixtures are getting lined up. As long as it's code, it's fine. Like, there's exposed conduit, it's fine. Like, we're not going to worry about that, right? Whereas, I worked for a very serious modernist architect. He's amazing, does incredible work. It was one of my first real architecture jobs. But I distinctly remember drawing lots of very specific details about exactly where the light switches were supposed to go, right? That the electrician mostly ignored.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, like how much
I would have to say that
know?
electricians are the ones that put the stuff wherever they want.
Yeah.
Time and time again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like a lot of other things that we've had really good luck with working with GCs and in terms of like the finished carpentry that they have, like I'm always impressed, and they're always bringing up good ways to resolve things that we're very happy with. But the electricians, a lot of times you're just like, why did you? But there's an endless debate between trades of like, who goes first and whose fault is which. And
yeah, and I think a lot of it too is just again to the point of information and who's the decision maker on a project. Many of the times it reduces their margins to actually go out and find these answers, which is why these decisions are made rapidly on site.
It's true, but I think that's also why we don't have, just in our particular firm, why we don't have a lot of issue with that is because we do a service with our clients where we become the construction managers.
Nice.
Because we work with smaller GCs, we're not working with like big GC firms. So we are the architects, the designers, and the owners rep and the construction manager. So we're there weekly, and so we're seeing everything and we're like checking in. And it also gives the trades the opportunity because they all know we're coming by weekly. Yeah. So they're like, oh, okay, I'll
hiding behind fences. Yeah.
No, I mean, they're great. They're like, I'll wait till they're here and then I'll ask, where you want this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good collaborative workflow, and that's really what we're trying to look for in the industry, is to break down these barriers and have these conversations. Because there are a number of people that are going to be watching this podcast that are very much like, my job ends at CD, and you take the drawings and do what you want with them, but make sure it's exactly how I envisioned it. And there's no communication line that happens between there. It's just they get stuck on site, they make a decision. We had a project go through where a detail was provided on the drawings, but a mechanical installer said, we've always done it this way. And they took two HVAC ducts that were showing on a drawing as two lines side by side and rotated them vertically so that they would sit inside of their ductwork the way they wanted it to. What that ended up doing is taking 500 plus units, and the kitchens that were supposed to go in them, all the uppers, you can imagine what that did when it added or took away 6 inches off the top of uppers that were already ordered. So yeah, big costly mistake for something they've always done. And and again, no communication line, not knowing when to come back. But with that, I mean, how do you foresee this? And you're obviously living it. If you had advice for anyone else that's listening to the podcast of how to communicate more effectively on this, what's the best route to take?
I mean, you can never put enough information in the drawings, but then you also have to be, you also have to relay that information in other ways. I think, you know, it definitely needs to all be in the drawings so that you can point at it quickly and easily and show the communication. But
But
if you can't be on site, I mean, having some kind of rep that is there is really the best.
also there's something, this is a little against the grain, but like, you know, you're taught in school drafting convention to only put information in once, right? You're supposed to ideally only show something in a single place in your drawing set, right? You know, like you don't want like redundant drawings in the drawing set. Or at least that's an older school drafting convention, right? You know, like you're supposed to show information clearly, you're supposed to show it once, like, you know, that kind of stuff. We actually find ourselves doing a lot of like, oh, here's the overall drawing set that's for the permit, and now we're going to make another sheet that's just for the cabinet guy. You know, and it's just going to repeat it. It's the same information, and this is one of the things that's handy because we're using Revit. It makes it easy to do. You're not going to like make mistakes because it's coming from the same model. But here's a sheet that's just everything about what happens to happen in this one room that's for the cabinet guy, right? And that way you can hand him that sheet and like, you know.
And here's a bunch of sheets on like the whole project that are just a whole bunch of 3D views that I can show the GC and be like, look, see how it's supposed to look? It's supposed to look like that.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh yeah, I see.
Yeah. Totally.
Drawings are hard to read. I mean, I don't care how long you've been doing it. You're always like, what is this? What are we looking at?
Yeah. So our drawing sets, you'd see actually probably more redundancies in them that you would see in some other drawing sets, just purely because we're trying to curate the information for the audience that we know is going to be getting it, right?
So. Yeah, that's crazy. And then I'm writing chapter for some of the U.S. textbooks that are coming out for reading drawings. It's literally the book for colleges, universities out there. And there's a whole BIM section that's being added into it, which is really exciting. And the story that I have about this was for my own house. I fully 3D modeled every little thing in there. It was crazy. But you could hear the framer sitting 30 feet up on the rafters going, no, really? It fit again? This is unbelievable. Was loving every second of it. And when it came time to do the concrete for the garage, I very specifically put in the slopes and dimensions in 3D to show exactly how everything fit. When I came back from work that day to see the finished job, it had been dropped down to flat. And he said, well, it didn't look right to me, so we just made it flat. It was poured completely flat. I didn't even look at the drawings. And it was just how they've always been. So these are constantly things that just come back, and it's, you got to kind of fight it. But hey, I just wanted to say thank you for jumping on CODii's Crossfire here, Jillian. You've been an excellent guest. We're going to wrap up the show here and get everything all going. But continue enjoying the sunshine. We also have sunshine out here on the East Coast, and we're wrapping up the little bits of rays that are here. But thank you very much for joining on.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Cheers. So we're about ready to wrap up here, Jeffrey. And is it Jeff or Jeffrey? I know I should have asked that from the beginning.
No, it's okay. Jeffrey is fine. Either is fine, to be honest. I started going as Jeffrey professionally a long time ago because I joined an office that already had a Jeff. And so they were like, well, you're Jeffrey instead of Jeff. So professionally, I've been Jeffrey because of that. But it doesn't really matter to me. So.
Well, it's more for our viewers because they're going to be hearing your name around quite a bit here. So I guess the big takeaway here, if you could force one behavior change across AECO tomorrow, not a tool, what would it be?
Oh man, that's a big question. Let's see. Yeah, I don't, that's a really big question. Because it'd just be a single change across the entire industry, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah. And it can't be a tool.
Yeah, and it can't be a tool. Yeah, no, I wasn't thinking tool. Yeah, I would, I think I would probably, if I could enforce a change, there are some, and this again is going to be a little bit of a spicy take. I think that there's certain cultural things, especially in American architectural culture, that are honestly not very productive for the architects or the construction industry in general. And so I do think that there could be some cultural changes that could happen in the construction industry, specifically within architecture. And what I mean is like some of these things that you're just talking about in terms of like attitude towards contractors, right? You know, like I'm going to do this drawing set and my drawing set is Senkosik, and, you know, I'm not even going to listen to the contractor because I'm just going to ignore the fact that they think that there might be a better way to do this, right? Because we see this happen a lot. Like we see in some jobs where some architect is so convinced, and you know, it's that classic ego problem, because like in order to be an architect, you have to have some amount of ego, because you have to have some amount of like, hey, I think the world should be a certain way, and here's why, right? You know, and that takes a certain amount of ego, but it's very easy for that to tip over into some toxic way where people, you know, are insecure, and they really, if you're not directly involved in the construction, you really only have power of persuasion, right? Like you have power to like try to talk people into things. And so what we see is like architects that are terrified to look dumb in front of a client or in front of a contractor. So they refuse to have open, honest conversations about certain things purely because they think it might make them not look, you know, as an architect, right? Mm-hmm. You know, or whatever that is. And so you get in this really weird space where like, instead of having a frank conversation with the stucco guy to be like, oh, hey, what do you think of our stucco details? Do you think we should do this differently? Right.
Yeah.
You know, and this guy who knows stucco and has been doing it for a really long time can then frankly tell you like, oh yeah, this thing that you did here, if we do it this way, it's more prone to leaking in 10 years. Right. And be like, okay, let's not do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, right, exactly. Right. And like, there's a lot of architects that just literally can't have that conversation purely because of a kind of ingrained culture around like who an architect is and how they're supposed to act. Now, I totally get that there's liability issues, right? Like you're not in certain contractual obligations, you're not allowed to talk to the subcontractors like that, right? I totally get that, respect that, deeply respect that, right? Totally understand that. But I just mean in general, you know, one of the things I come back to a lot is, you know, the construction industry fundamentally is a service industry. Like fundamentally, we are being hired by clients to build things for those clients, right?
Yes, correct.
There's a lot of people, especially when you get into the more like architectural side of things, that really wish that wasn't the case and are frustrated by the fact that it is the case and act badly, I think, because of it. And so if you're like, so if there was some change I could like magically happen across the whole industry, it just basically to get everybody to agree that, you know, construction is a service industry. You know, we have clients, we're all working together to try to like, you know, make a great building and make money, and everybody likes building. That's why we got into this in the first place, right? You know, kind of thing. And to help make things, that communication go a lot smoother, you know, between the parties.
And I always look at it too, like we set up the core value of what puts together a project, and it's cost, schedule, and documents, and what they ultimately those three compile. But the cost is the overrunning thing that drives this project. You can extract and pull money from everything, but that's where the source of stress and anxiety comes from in a project. And ultimately, the entire team, from 440 touch points on any given project, is all wrapped into that cost. And the ultimate goal is collectively to work informed as much as humanly possible. And that collaborative aspect of having empathy and understanding what needs to be done to give longevity to a building that you've worked so hard on is super important. I've seen firms that have held on to details for years and they've constantly been adjusted on site so that they can be constructible. And to their issue, I mean, it never actually came back to the office as a change.
Right.
So
like there was no feedback loop there.
Correct.
Right?
So if, to your point, the feedback loop, there's gotta be a better way to bring that back instead of just RFIs, because on site they make corrections, they need fast answers, they do what they know is right in front of them. But if there's a better way to decrease the time on that feedback loop, then boom, we've got collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, with that, the behavior change is a big portion of it. And Motif is doing some crazy things to really take that behavioral change and listen to the questions and statements that have come out of our industry and build something that is fundamentally required for our process to improve. And so I guess in closing, where can people find Motif, and where can they find you? What are the thoughts that that you want us to get out of it?
100%. So you can go to Motif, motif.io is the website. So if you go to motif.io, there is now, just of this last week or so, a way that you can do a self-service for the collaboration app that we launched just last year, and that we're continuing to develop. That's the kind of messy collaboration idea where you can like publish Rhino and Revit models into it and then invite other people in and then draw over the top of them and add images and add different things. Cool. And it has like AI rendering capability, so you can set up a camera and do like photoreal renders out of like fairly simple models, and it's got a lot of capabilities, and we're adding like more things to be able to do more like sheet review and like different things that you're able to do in terms of like markups and stuff, to be in that kind of thing. And that is now publicly available. So if you want to just check that out, you just go to motif.io. It's a whole thing where you can just sign on and do a trial. And then in terms of the design application, which is the thing I've been more heavily involved in and was talking about in this podcast, that's something that if you're interested in, please reach out to us through motif.io, or I'm Jeffrey, JEFFREY.McGrew, MCGREW at motif.io. You can email me directly. If you're interested in the design app, let's talk, because I would love to talk more about, with everybody, with firms and contractors and engineers, about kind of what are their needs and wants and desires when it comes to a new BIM platform, And we are starting to form certain like strategic partnerships with some larger firms that are gonna start in about a month or so, kicking the tires on the design app to some extent. It's very early. It doesn't, we have a long ways to go before it's really viable as a, like, you can actually do your job with this tool. But, pretty soon here we'll have some basic stuff in place where you could actually start seeing like what does this look like? You know what I mean? Like when you zoom way back and you look at it, you can get an idea of what the overall picture is. And so, so if you have any interest in that, please reach out to me and I can, talk to you about it. And we can also, possibly, depending on, that kind of beta program that we're having for the design app, might be able to get your firm directly involved in it too. So
that's awesome. Well, you know what? Yeah. Thanks again, Jeffrey. It's been fantastic having you on the call. A lot of listeners who listen to the show are, highly technical and really love to get their hands dirty. We are going to be mixing up the guests every now and then throughout the show, ranging from contractors to window installers to those who write the software like yourselves and many more. And we're super excited to have your perspective on the industry, because the industry is changing. We want it to change in the right way, and having the big minds there is super important. So thanks again.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on. It was really great.
And thank you, everyone, listeners to Buck Fim. Just make sure to tune in. We episodes dropping June 1st, and we'll be carrying on every week thereafter. And again, thank you, everyone listening, and have yourself a wonderful day. Cheers.